Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, or if you're coming for your first time, welcome. I do a lot of educational content, and right now I'm actually going to start a lecture series on anatomy. I studied my undergrad at McGill in Montreal, Canada, and I majored in anatomy and cell biology. So this is kind of like my forte, and I really want to do a lecture series on this. So without any further ado, let's start. This is lecture number 1. It's going to be anatomical terminology. And basically, this is going to give us a strong foundation to go forwards on. If you don't really understand the fundamentals of anatomy, it's going to be very, very difficult to proceed and go on to further lectures. Anyways, if you like this, please subscribe. I'll be making more content like this, and thank you if you do. So first and foremost, we have to begin with the anatomical position. This is when the body is standing upright with its arms to the side and its palms facing out. I know this seems like a small detail, but its palms facing out is very, very important because it shows that certain vessels and bones are going to be lateral or on the outside as compared to medial on the closer inwards towards the trunk. So the palms facing out is actually quite an important thing. Anyways, we have our first bit of terminology, the anterior versus posterior. So anterior or ventral means towards the front. So I would say that this man's nipples are anterior to his spine. And what do I mean by that? I mean that his nipples are further in front than his spine is. Posterior is the exact opposite. Posterior or dorsal means that it's towards the back. So I would say that this woman's spine is posterior to her lungs because her spine is behind her lungs. Our second is superior or cranial versus inferior or caudal. So superior and cranial means towards the head or higher up, and inferior and caudal means towards the bottom. So I would say this man's clavicle is superior to his floating rib that's down here. Or I would say that this man's clavicle is cranial to his floating rib. Next we have inferior or caudal, and that means towards the bottom, right? So I could say this man's knee is caudal to his stomach, which would be in here, right? What else? Now we have medial and lateral. And so something that is more medial is towards the middle, and something that is lateral means it's out wide. So I would say this man's belly button is medial to his hip or his flank. And I would say his thumb is lateral to his pinky. Next, we have proximal versus distal, and that is all about the trunk of the body. So here, this is the man's trunk. And this is the woman's trunk right here. So anything that is proximal means it's closer to the trunk, and anything that is distal means it's further away. So I can say that this young lady's wrist is distal to her elbow because it's further away from the trunk. I could also say that her shoulder is proximal to her elbow because her shoulder is closer to her trunk than her elbow. The final one is we have ipsilateral versus bilateral versus contralateral. So ipsilateral means that they are on the same side. If I was going to explain pain on this dummy, I would say, oh, he has pain on his shoulder, on his right shoulder, and his ipsilateral elbow. So it'd be both his right shoulder and his right elbow because they're on the same side. Bilateral means that it is affecting both sides. Maybe this young man has a disease that is affecting both of his eyes. I can say it is a bilateral disease affecting his eyes because it's affecting both of them. The final term is contralateral, and that means opposite sides. So you may have heard that a human's brain is made up of its right and left hemisphere, and its left hemisphere, I know that's on the right side for us, but for the body facing outwards, it is actually his left hemisphere of his brain. We know that his left hemisphere of his brain actually controls his right side of the body, and vice versa. The right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. And so what does this mean? This means that the brain's control over the body is contralateral, because one side of the brain controls the opposite side of the body. So those are the main positional terms we use in anatomy. Now we have the anatomical planes and axes. First, the planes. We have the frontal or coronal plane, and that is this one in blue right here. And that splits the body in half between my shoulders, right? So this plane goes right in between my shoulders this way, and it's like this. And this frontal plane moves along the sagittal axis. This is the sagittal axis. And this sagittal axis we see is right here. So we can see this frontal plane, it actually moves up and down the sagittal axis from the anterior to the posterior. Next, we have the sagittal plane, which is this one here in pink, and it splits your body right in the middle between your sternum. That's how I remember it. It's between your sternum. And this plane can actually move on the transverse axis. This axis right here is the transverse axis. And how can it move on the transverse axis? Well, this entire plane can move left or right, cutting the body in different segments like that. Finally, we have the horizontal plane, and that's this one right here. And we know that this plane moves along the longitudinal axis. This is the longitudinal axis right here. And so this plane can go up and it can go down, moving along the longitudinal axis. So you can have a cut that goes around here on the stomach, but it can also go up here, up to the chest, up to the head, and it will still be the horizontal plane. It's just at different points among the longitudinal axis. If you have any questions about this, leave it in the comments and I will be sure to answer all of them. Finally, we have the anatomical regions, and this is just for the trunk. We really need precise descriptions of this area simply because there is so much going on in terms of digestion, in terms of your circulatory system, in terms of your pulmonary system. Everything is in this area, so we really have to be very specific when we're talking about these regions. So we can see that these 9 regions are divided by 4 lines. We have 2 vertical lines and then 2 horizontal lines. The 2 vertical lines are called the mid-clavicular planes. If you touch your clavicle and you see how long it is in the middle of the clavicle, vertically downwards, that is your mid-clavicular plane. Next are the subcostal plane, which is right here, subcostal plane, right here. And then the other horizontal one is your intertubercular plane, right there. These are the horizontal planes that divide the whole region. So, starting with the top right region, remember, this is our left, but if you look at the dummy, it's the top right of him. If you place this on yourself, it's your top right. So the first is the right hypochondriac region, and this is paired with the left hypochondriac region. And in between them is the epigastric region. If you go down one more level, now we're between the subcostal and intertubercular planes, and you have your right lumbar region. This is also known as your right lateral region, and it's paired along with the left lumbar region right here, also known as the left lateral region. In between them, this is where we get in between all of the lines, right? It's below the subcostal line, above the intertubercular plane, medial to both of the mid-clavicular planes. We get this big region, the umbilical region. Finally, we're now going below the intertubercular plane right here. And on the right and left side, we have the right and left iliac region. This is also known as the right and left inguinal region. And in between them, this is the hypogastric region. And that is the final term I'm going to give you for this lecture. The next lecture, we're going to learn about the cranium, and specifically I'm going to go through all the bones in the cranium and maybe all of the fossa. We'll see how far we get. I want to make these videos into real bite-sized chunks so you can really grasp the concepts that I'm talking about. Anyways, I'm really new to YouTube, of course, and I would really love any constructive criticism or any feedback you have, so please leave it in the comments. And if you do enjoy it and you want to see lecture number 2, subscribe and you won't miss it. Thank you so much. See you guys.